Well, today we are in Ezekiel chapter 12. I've entitled this The Sign of the Exile, or The Exile Foretold. The Exile Foretold, that's what this is about. As you recall, earlier in the book, Ezekiel was told only to speak when he was commanded by God to speak, and otherwise to be silent. We open this chapter in verses 1 through 7 with a silent sign, kind of a dramatization of what's going to befall Israel this coming exile. So in verses 1 and 2, the prophet's told to prepare a sign to get ready to do this. And I want you to notice at the end of verse 2 that even though Israel is characteristically rebellious, God in his grace, I think, offers them a sign if they'd only pay attention, if they'd only heed it. Sometimes wonder what God is trying to say to us in the world all around us, and sometimes we just miss it. Sometimes we aren't paying attention. I've been teaching a series through the attributes of God at the church where I serve, and one of the things that's really impressed me is how we live in a really a God-saturated world, and we just miss it so often. Well, Ezekiel is offering a sign here from God to the people all around them if they'll just pay attention. What is that sign? Verses 3 through 6, Ezekiel's told to load up, basically, get his stuff together and leave as a captive, leave the city as a captive. This is an object lesson. As he leaves, it says he's not to look at the land. We're going to see this again, I think, in chapter 12, or verse 12. But this is, again, a prophecy here. You know, Zedekiah left the land and couldn't see it because he had been blinded. So when he was taken into exile, 2 Kings 24 will fill you in on that if you want the background. But this is the sign that Ezekiel is supposed to give to the people, a sign that they are like him, going to go into exile, and at least some of them, Zedekiah, will not see the land as they leave. Verses 8 through 20 is an explanation of the sign. You know, sometimes people make much of the signs in the Bible, and often interpreters will fill in the sign out of their own imagination. But most of the time, the Bible tells us what the sign signifies, and that's what we find here in verses 8 through 20, an explanation. First of all, beginning, we see some in Israel have taken the clue, and they've raised some questions in their mind about what's going on. This dramatization was to raise those questions so God can answer them, and God's reply is that everyone, from the king down to the inhabitants of the land, are going to go into exile, just as Ezekiel dramatized. Verses 12 through 13 says, "The prince who is among them will load his baggage on his shoulder in the dark and go out. They will dig a hole in the wall to bring it out, and he will cover his face so that he cannot see the land with his eyes." Well, Zedekiah tried to escape. He escaped through the city, perhaps literally digging a hole through the wall to escape. He was caught, brought back, sons killed before him. The last thing he saw was their death because he was then blinded and taken into exile. So Zedekiah fulfills this prophecy. Verses 14 and 15 says that his entourage will be hunted down, again, as they were when Ezekiel attempted to escape. Verses 16 through 20, it says the remnant that's left in the city, that's left in the land, is going to be living in fear and in poverty because God has stripped the land of its abundance, stripped the land as a fulfillment of all the curses that were promised to them in Deuteronomy 28 if they forsook the law of God, and that will fall upon them. Verses 21 through 25 then talk about the certainty of this, what Ezekiel dramatized and what God explained is going to happen is certain. It's going to fall upon them. Verse 22, what we have here is kind of a proverb. Son of man, what is the proverb you people have concerning the land of Israel, saying the days are long and every vision fails? What this is speaking about is that they misunderstood God's delay, those long days. They understood his delay, misunderstood it to mean that the judgment would not come. But Ezekiel, and through the Lord, corrects them. Verses 23 and 24, God shows that this proverb is going to be false. He's going to show it by causing everything to come to pass exactly as he said. Verse 25, he says it's going to happen in your days. That is, the generation that Ezekiel was speaking to would witness the fulfillment of the prophecy. So the very generation that Ezekiel warned, the generation that said, well, it's delayed, it's not going to happen, Ezekiel's wrong, that very generation is going to see the fulfillment of the prophecies that have come from the Lord. And it was imminent. It was imminent. Again, people do everything they can to squirm out of responsibility that's imposed on us by God's prophetic word. In this case, the elders of the land, it seems, were saying that this is for the far distant future. In other words, don't worry about this. Ezekiel's prophecies are not for us. They're for the future. But God says, no, it's for now. It's going to soon come to pass. Which brings us to our application. Just as in Ezekiel's day, I think we live in a time where mockers mock the prophecies of God. They do it in a number of different ways, both inside and outside the church, unfortunately. They deride God's prophecies as being alarmism, or sometimes we're accused of escapism. People say things like we're witnessing today, wars, famine, poor leadership all over, that this has been going on all the time. Don't worry about that. It's just the way things are. So in Ezekiel's time, as they tried to minimize these things, that's what we see happening today. But brothers and sisters, we need to live in the expectation of the soon coming of the Lord. There's nothing that needs to happen before the rapture of the church. The fulfillment of that next prophecy could happen at any time. And as we study prophecy, as we study Ezekiel's prophecies and how they came to pass, as we saw with Zedekiah, just very literal fulfillment, which should strengthen us. When we see these things, when we study prophecy, when we understand both fulfilled and yet to be fulfilled prophecy, we should have strength. It should strengthen our hope, strengthen our expectation. As one of my professors at Dallas Seminary used to say, that God's prophetic word is there to encourage holy living. So brothers and sisters, may we take God's prophetic word serious. And by serious, I mean, may we live holy, obedient lives in light of his coming. God bless you, brothers and sisters. God bless your study of Ezekiel and your study of God's prophetic word.